The wind in the Hindu Kush mountains doesn't just blow, it scrapes. It carries the bitter chill of high altitude and a century of fine, metallic dust that settles into the pores of your skin, the threads of your uniform, and the deepest corners of your lungs. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance exhaled, a slow, measured breath that plumed white in the fading Afghan twilight before vanishing into the jagged rocks. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope of her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, the brutal landscape was reduced to a crisp, magnified circle of shadows and fading light. Her heart rate was a steady, rhythmic 50 beats per minute. In the United States Army Rangers, they called her Ghost. It wasn't just a call sign, it was a reputation. Elena didn't just blend into her environment, she became it. For 14 hours, she hadn't moved anything but her eyes and the slow rise and fall of her chest beneath her ghillie suit. She was the apex predator of the valley, the silent guardian of Task Force Aegis. But to the men on her team, she wasn't a killing machine. She was the den mother, the big sister, the one who made sure everyone came home. Wind's picking up, boss, a voice whispered. Lying 3 feet to her left, nestled securely in the shale and scrub brush, was Corporal Jax Miller. Jax was her spotter, her shadow, and her best friend. He had his eye pressed to the spotting scope, reading the mirage and the environmental variables that Elena needed to make her impossible shots. I feel it, Elena murmured, her voice a low rasp, barely carrying over the howling wind. Crosswind from the northwest, dropping the temperature. You know what this temperature reminds me of? Jax asked, shifting slightly to relieve the cramp in his thigh. Don't say it, Jax, Elena sighed, a faint smile touching the corners of her cracked lips. Ohio in November, Jax whispered reverently, entirely ignoring her. Specifically, Columbus. And you know what's in Columbus? Ghost? A little steakhouse on Broad Street that serves a bone-in ribeye the size of a hubcap. Medium rare, garlic butter melting right over the top. A baked potato loaded with so much bacon and cheddar it should be illegal. Elena kept her eye in the scope, scanning the valley floor 2,000 yards below. You're torturing yourself, Miller. All we've got in the MRE packs is jalapeno beef patty and a crushed packet of Skittles. A man's got to have dreams. Ghost, Jack said, a grin evident in his voice. Besides, I'm celebrating. We get back to base. My leave gets approved. 3 days from now, I'm on AC-17 back to the States. I'm going to hold Lily. At the mention of the name, the cold wind seemed to lose a bit of its bite. Lily was Jax's newborn daughter. She had come into the world 2 weeks ago, crying in a hospital room half a world away while Jax was on a satellite phone in a dusty tent. Crying right along with her. He carried a laminated photo of the baby taped to the inside of his wrist monitor. Every time he checked his altitude or compass, he saw her face. She's going to be terrified of you. You know, Elena said softly, you look like a yeti that rolled in a dirt patch. I'll shave. Jax chuckled. I'll shave. I'll shower. I'll put on the dress blues. She's gonna think her dad is Captain America. And hey, the offer still stands. You're flying back with us. Sarah already made up the guest room. She says you're officially Aunt Elena now. And if you don't show up for the steak dinner, she's coming to DC to drag you out of your apartment by your ear. Elena's finger rested lightly alongside the trigger guard of her rifle. Her own apartment in Washington, D.C. was empty. No plans, no pets, no family. The military was her family. Jax, Captain Hayes, Doc Gonzalez, they were her blood. Tell Sarah I'll be there, Elena promised, the words hanging heavy and genuine in the freezing air. I'll buy the first round. Hell yeah, Jax whispered. Hold on, comcheck. Jax tapped his earpiece as the encrypted radio hummed to life with a burst of static. Overwatch. This is Aegis Actual. Do you have eyes on the LZ? Over. It was Captain Hap Hayes, the team leader, down in the valley, invisible in the creeping darkness. Hap and 5 other Tier 1 operators were moving into position. Elena pressed her throat mic. Aegis Actual. This is Overwatch. We have the high ground. The LZ is clear. I see no movement in the compound. The valley is quiet. Over. Copy that. Ghost. We are Oscar Mike. 2 mics out from the target building. Keep us safe up there. Out. The radio clicked off. The mission was a snatch and grab. High-value target extraction. The intel had come down directly from the Pentagon, stamped with the highest clearance codes. A local warlord who had been brokering illegal arms deals was supposed to be sleeping in the mud brick compound below. Task Force Aegis was supposed to kick in the door, bag him, and be back on a Black Hawk helicopter before the local militia even knew they were missing a boss. It was a textbook raid. Simple, clean. But as Elena scanned the compound, a cold knot began to form in the pit of her stomach. It was a feeling she had learned to trust over 4 tours in combat zones. The sniper's intuition. In her line of work, math was everything. You calculated distance, humidity, wind speed, the spin drift of the bullet, the rotation of the earth. But war itself? War was chaos. It was messy, unpredictable, and ugly. Right now, looking through her scope, the math of the battlefield was entirely too perfect. Jax, Elena whispered, her tone shifting instantly from friendly banter to dead serious professionalism. Check the thermal feeds from the drone overhead. What's the ambient temperature of the compound walls? Jax tapped on his ruggedized tablet, his brow furrowing beneath his camouflage paint. Walls are cooling down. But, wait, that's weird. Tell me, Elena said, her eyes darting from window to window in the compound below. The intel packet said the HVT traveled with a security detail of at least 20 men. Jax read off the glowing screen. But looking at the thermal footprint of the building, I'm only seeing heat signatures for maybe 3 people inside. And there's no vehicles in the courtyard. If he's a warlord, where are the technicals? Where are the machine gun trucks? Elena shifted her rifle, scanning the ridgelines opposite their position. And the dogs, she muttered. What? Every village in this province has feral dogs, Elena said, her heart rate creeping up from its resting 50 to a steady 65. Adrenaline was beginning to whisper in her veins. They bark at the wind. They bark at the moon. The boys are walking down there right now. Full gear, stepping on gravel, and the valley is dead silent. The dogs are gone. Jax, someone cleared them out. Jax looked up from his tablet, his eyes meeting hers. The easygoing father from Ohio was gone, replaced by the hardened ranger. You think the HVT isn't there? You think the intel is bad? I don't think it's bad, Elena said, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the freezing Afghan wind. I think it's too good. The satellite coordinates we got 30 minutes ago. They routed Hap and the boys through the canyon bottleneck. It's the only way to the compound. It's the safest route, Jax argued, though doubt was bleeding into his voice. DC said the overhead satellites confirmed no enemy movement in the canyon. Elena pressed her eye tighter to the scope, staring at the sheer rock walls of the canyon that her team was currently walking through. Jax, if you wanted to trap a Tier 1 operator team, where would you put them? Jax swallowed hard. In a canyon bottleneck, where they can't maneuver. Get Hap on the radio, Elena ordered, her voice slicing through the wind like a razor. Now. Jax jammed his finger onto the transmit button. Aegis Actual, this is Overwatch. Abort. Repeat. Abort. The compound is cold. I say again, the target is not. A deafening crack shattered the silence of the Hindu Kush. It wasn't a rifle shot. It was the concussive, chest-thumping roar of a high-explosive anti-tank mine. Down in the valley, exactly where the Pentagon's perfect coordinates had told Task Force Aegis to walk. A massive fireball erupted into the night sky, painting the canyon walls in a horrific, violent orange light. Elena flinched as the shockwave rolled up the mountain, vibrating through the shale and rattling her bones. Her breath caught in her throat. Through the scope, the neat, orderly world she had been watching was instantly replaced by smoke, fire, and absolute chaos. Hap, Jax screamed into the radio, the static hissing back at him violently. Doc, Aegis Actual, do you copy? Sound off. Nothing but the crackle of burning brush and the dead hum of empty airwaves. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. The knot in her stomach twisted into pure ice. The dogs hadn't barked because the enemy was already in position, waiting. They hadn't moved because they had been dug into the cliffs for days. They knew exactly where Task Force Aegis was going to be, down to the very inch. As the flames illuminated the canyon below, Elena saw the silhouettes of dozens of armed men stepping out from the caves and shadows along the ridgeline. aiming their weapons down into the burning kill zone. It wasn't a snatch and grab. It was an execution. "Ghost," Jack said, his voice trembling as he looked at the slaughter below. He reached for his assault rifle. "We have to provide cover fire. We have to." "Jax, wait," Elena said, her trained eye catching a sudden flash of light on the ridge directly across from them. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The enemy wasn't just in the valley. They knew where the sniper overwatch was. "Two. Incoming," Elena screamed, lunging across the rocks to tackle Jax as the sky above them tore open. The world didn't just end, it shattered into a million deafening, burning pieces. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the shale outcropping directly above their sniper hide, vaporizing the rock and sending a shockwave of concussive force slamming into Elena's chest. The air was violently sucked from her lungs. For a terrifying, suspended second, there was no sound, no gravity, no cold, only a blinding flash of white light and the violent sensation of being thrown backward through the dirt. When her hearing returned, it was a high-pitched, agonizing whine, accompanied by the heavy rain of pulverized stone showering down on her ghillie suit. "Ghost, Ghost, you hit?" Jax's hands were on her shoulders, shaking her, his face a mask of dust and panic. A jagged cut across his forehead was pouring dark blood into his left eye. But he was alive. His M4 assault rifle was already up, tracking the darkness. Elena tasted copper. She spit a mouthful of dust and blood into the dirt, forcing her muscles to obey her brain. "I'm good," she gasped, rolling onto her stomach and frantically dragging her M2010 sniper rifle back into the firing position. "Talk to me, Jax, talk to me. They knew we were here." Jax shouted over the echoing gunfire below. "That wasn't a blind shot. They had our overwatch pre-sighted." Elena pressed her bruised eye to the scope and looked down into the valley. What she saw froze the blood in her veins. The floor of the canyon was a designated kill box. Task Force Aegis had been funneled into a narrow chasm where the steep, rocky walls offered zero cover. Down in the smoke and the flashing strobe light of muzzle flashes, she could see Hap and the rest of the team pinned behind the burning wreckage of the first explosion. Tracer rounds, glowing green streams of enemy fire, were pouring down on them from 3 different elevations. It was a textbook L-shaped ambush. "We have to relieve the pressure," Elena yelled. She settled her breathing, forcing the panic down into a cold, dark box in her mind. Focus, front sight, trigger squeeze. She found an enemy machine gunner silhouetted against the flames on the eastern ridge. She exhaled. Crack, the recoil punched her shoulder, and the gunner dropped out of sight. She worked the bolt action with lightning speed. Crack, another target down. But it was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. For every man she dropped, 3 more stepped out of the caves. "Aegis Actual, this is Overwatch. Move to the secondary rally point," Jax screamed into the radio. "Fall back to the riverbed." Suddenly, the encrypted radio channel crackled loudly, drowning out Jax's voice. A heavy, accented voice spoke in broken English over their earpieces. "There is no riverbed, Americans, only the grave." Elena froze, her finger hovering over the trigger. Jax stared at his radio headset in absolute horror. "They're on our comms," Jax whispered, his voice cracking. "Ghost. They have our frequency-hopping algorithms. They have everything." Down in the valley, a second massive explosion ripped through the American position. Through the optics, Elena watched, helpless, as Captain Hap Hayes was thrown violently against the canyon wall, his body going limp. Doc Gonzalez lunged forward to drag him back, but a volley of heavy machine gun fire tore through the medic's Kevlar vest. "No, no, no, no," Elena choked out, tears mixing with the dust on her face. Her family, her brothers, they were being butchered, and she was watching it through a magnified lens. "Ghost, we're getting flanked," Jax yelled, pivoting his M4 toward the trail leading up to their ridge. Muzzle flashes erupted from the darkness less than 50 yards away. The enemy had sent a cleanup crew for the snipers. Jax opened fire, his M4 barking in rapid, controlled bursts. "We gotta move, now. I'm not leaving them," Elena screamed, chambering another round and firing blindly into the advancing shadows. They're gone. Elena, Jax roared, grabbing the strap of her tactical vest. Aegis is gone. We have to survive. Move. Before Elena could push herself up, a small, metallic clink echoed against the rocks, inches from her boots. Time slowed down to a crawl. It was an old, Soviet-era fragmentation grenade. Its ribbed, iron body sat innocently in the dirt between them. The pin was gone. Elena's brain processed the fatal geometry of the small space. There was nowhere to dive. There was no time to throw it back. The blast radius would turn them both into a red mist. She looked up at Jax, opening her mouth to scream his name. But Jax didn't look at the grenade. He looked at Elena. In that fraction of a second, Elena saw the easygoing father from Ohio disappear. She saw the ranger. She saw the man who had promised his wife he was coming home. Live, Jax whispered. He lunged forward, not away from the explosive, but directly onto it. He wrapped his body armor completely over the iron shell, tucking his chin to his chest. Jax! The explosion was muffled by his body, but the kinetic force was devastating. The concussive wave lifted Elena off the ground and threw her backward into the shallow ravine behind their position. Her head struck a jagged rock, and the world dissolved into a blinding, deafening gray static. She didn't know how long she lay in the darkness. When consciousness clawed its way back into her brain, the silence was heavier than the gunfire had been. Her ears were ringing with a vicious, unending tone. Her left arm was completely numb, warm blood soaking through her sleeve from a piece of shrapnel embedded in her shoulder. She opened one eye. The sky above was beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple. Dawn was coming. She heard the crunching of boots on gravel. Elena didn't move. She didn't breathe. She slowed her heart rate down, 50 beats. 40 beats. 35. Entering the meditative state they had taught her in sniper school to evade thermal detection. She became a corpse. 3 men walked to the edge of the ravine. They were speaking softly in Pashto. One of them kicked her boots. She remained entirely limp, her face buried in the dirt, satisfied she was just another piece of American collateral. They turned and walked away, carrying Jax's M4 and her beloved sniper rifle as trophies. Elena waited until the sound of their footsteps faded completely into the howling wind. Only then did she let out a trembling, agonizing breath. She dragged herself up the lip of the ravine, her muscles screaming in protest. The smell of cordite and burned flesh hung thick in the cold air. She crawled over the blackened earth to where Jax lay. His body armor had absorbed the worst of it, saving her life, but the blast had been too much. He was gone. Elena collapsed beside him, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she reached out and gently closed his sightless eyes. As she moved his arm, something fluttered in the freezing wind. It was the laminated photograph of Lily, taped to the inside of his wrist monitor. The newborn baby, swaddled in a pink blanket, smiling up at the brutal Afghan sky. A sob tore through Elena's throat. Raw and animalistic, she pressed her forehead against Jax's chest, weeping for the brother she had lost, for the little girl who would never know her father, for the steak dinner in Ohio that would never happen. But as the grief washed over her, something else began to take root in the empty, bleeding space inside her chest. A cold, hard clarity. She sat up, wincing as the shrapnel shifted in her shoulder. She looked down at the valley, now a silent graveyard, and her sniper's mind began to run the variables. The enemy knew their exact path. They knew the sniper overwatch position. They had the encryption keys to their radios. And the warlord's compound had been entirely empty. Task Force Aegis hadn't stumbled into an ambush. They had been delivered to one. Elena remembered the mission briefing in the Tactical Operations Center. The original route had been over the northern ridge, but 10 minutes before the choppers lifted off, the secure data link from the Pentagon had flashed with an urgent update. New coordinates, a new route through the canyon, authorized by the highest levels of the Department of Defense. Only someone in DC could do that, she thought, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Someone in a suit, sitting in an air-conditioned office in the Pentagon, typed those coordinates into a computer and murdered my family. Elena Vance reached down and carefully untaped the photo of baby Lily from Jax's wrist. She tucked it securely into the breast pocket of her uniform, right over her heart. She wasn't going to die on this mountain. She was going to crawl through the dirt, survive the desert, and make it back to Washington. The people who did this thought they had buried a squad of rangers in the Hindu Kush. They didn't realize they had just unleashed a ghost. The silence of Ward 4B at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was worse than the deafening roar of the ambush. In the mountains, noise meant you were alive. Gunfire, screaming, the rotor wash of a medevac chopper, they were the chaotic sounds of survival. But here, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the premier military hospital in Washington, D.C., the only sound was the rhythmic, synthetic beep of Alina's heart monitor and the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on freshly waxed linoleum. It smelled of industrial bleach, rubbing alcohol, and the distinct, metallic scent of suppressed grief. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance sat rigidly on the edge of her pristine hospital bed. Her left arm was bound tightly in a dark blue sling, immobilizing a shoulder that had been surgically reconstructed to remove 3 jagged pieces of Soviet-era shrapnel. She was 20 pounds lighter than she had been a month ago. Her skin, usually tanned by the desert sun, held a sickly, translucent pallor. Directly across from her stood Major General Marcus Thorne. His dress uniform was immaculate, a chest full of colorful ribbons reflecting the harsh overhead light. He held a small, velvet-lined box in his hands. "Staff Sergeant Vance," Thorne began, his voice a rich, practiced baritone that sounded like it belonged in a recruitment commercial rather than a hospital room. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of your own life above and beyond the call of duty, it is my distinct honor to present you with the Silver Star." He stepped forward and pinned the medal to the breast of Alina's hospital gown. It was a beautiful piece of metal, a silver star superimposed on a bronze wreath. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. "Thank you, sir," Elena said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. She didn't look at the medal. She looked through the general, her eyes fixed on the blank white wall behind him. "You're a hero, Elena," Thorne said softly, dropping the formal military cadence. He offered a sympathetic, deeply rehearsed smile. "What you did out there, surviving for 4 days in the hostile perimeter, crawling 12 miles back to friendly lines. It's superhuman. The brass is calling it a miracle." "It wasn't a miracle, General," Elena replied, her tone turning dangerously cold. "It was a slaughter. Task Force Aegis was led into a canyon bottleneck that the enemy had pre-sighted. They had heavy armor waiting for us. They knew our exact radio frequencies." Thorne sighed, the paternal sympathy in his eyes hardening into bureaucratic exhaustion. He crossed his arms. "Staff Sergeant, we've been over this in your debriefings. The Hindu Kush is a chaotic theater. The Taliban warlords have been heavily funded lately. They get lucky. It's the fog of war. The fog of war doesn't change exfil coordinates 10 minutes before a drop." Elena pushed back, her jaw tightening. "The order came from the Pentagon. It routed us directly into a kill zone. It was bad intel. Vance, it happens," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a warning register. "An intelligence analyst misread a satellite sweep. And a tragic mistake was made. The Department of Defense is conducting a thorough internal review. But you need to let this go. You need to focus on your physical therapy. You've done your duty. Take the medal. Take the psychiatric leave. Go home and heal." He gave her one last tight nod, turned on his heel, and marched out of the room. Elena sat in the silence for a long time. She looked down at the silver star resting over her heart. Beneath the gown, taped securely to her ribs just under the bandages, was the laminated photo of baby Lily. She felt the sharp edge of the plastic pressing into her skin, a constant, painful reminder of the debt she owed. Bad intel. A tragic mistake. Elena was a sniper. In her world, there were no mistakes. There were only variables that you either calculated, or you ignored at your own peril. You accounted for the spin drift, the barometric pressure, the curvature of the Earth. You looked at the world through a magnified lens and noticed the things everyone else missed. With her good arm, Elena reached over to the bedside table and pulled her government-issued laptop onto her lap. Over the past 3 weeks of her recovery, she had used her security clearance to pull the unclassified and semi-classified after-action reports, AAR, of the ambush. Officially, She told her commanding officers she was looking for closure. Unofficially, she was hunting. She opened the digital file labeled Operational Oversight, Task Force Aegis. The military documented everything. For every bullet fired, there was a gigabyte of data. Elena scrolled past the casualty lists, forcing herself not to look at Jax's name, and opened the raw ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance video feed. It was the thermal imaging recorded by the Predator drone that had been circling 30,000 feet above the valley that night. She pressed play. The screen flickered, showing the black and white, ghostly terrain of the canyon. In the upper right corner of the screen, the military timestamp blinked in bright green digits, 4 hours 22 minutes and 10 seconds. Elena watched the feed. At 4 hours 22 minutes and 15 seconds, the screen showed the empty canyon. Everything was still. 4 hours 22 minutes and 16 seconds. 4 hours 22 minutes and 17 seconds. Suddenly, the video hitched, a barely noticeable stutter in the playback. Elena hit pause. Her breath hitched in her throat. She leaned closer to the screen, the glow of the laptop illuminating the fierce intensity in her eyes. She rewound the video 10 seconds and slowed the playback speed to a frame-by-frame crawl. Snipers were trained to spot anomalies in the environment. A blade of grass bent the wrong way. A shadow that didn't match the sun's angle. She watched the green numbers in the corner. 4 hours 22 minutes and 17 seconds. 4 hours 22 minutes and 18 seconds. 4 hours 22 minutes and 48 seconds. Elena froze the frame. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. A heavy, rhythmic thud that echoed in her ears. 30 seconds. Exactly 30 seconds of the drone footage were completely gone. The timestamp had jumped forward. To a layman, or a careless intelligence officer skimming the report, a 30-second skip on a choppy satellite feed in a mountain range wouldn't mean a thing. A glitch in the transmission. A dropped signal. But Elena looked at the shadows cast by the rocks on the canyon floor. In frame 4 hours 22 minutes and 18 seconds, the shadow of a large boulder was touching a patch of scrub brush. In the very next frame, at 4 hours 22 minutes and 48 seconds, the shadow had shifted a microscopic fraction of an inch to the left. You can't fake the rotation of the Earth. You can't fake the movement of the moon. The video hadn't glitched. It had been spliced, cut and stitched back together by someone with high-level access to the Department of Defense mainframe. Someone had manually erased 30 seconds of footage from the official record. Why? Elena quickly fast-forwarded the video. 2 minutes later, the ambush began. The screen lit up with the white-hot blooms of explosions and the chaotic thermal signatures of enemy fighters pouring out of the caves. She stopped the video and closed the laptop, her hands trembling. It wasn't from weakness or grief. It was from pure, unadulterated rage. During those missing 30 seconds, something happened in that canyon that the brass didn't want the world to see. A signal flare, a vehicle moving into position, the enemy fighters taking their places. Whoever altered the video was the same person who had changed the coordinates and sent Aegis into the meat grinder. General Thorne had told her the enemy got lucky. But Elena now knew the terrifying truth. The enemy wasn't some nameless, faceless warlord hiding in a cave in the Middle East. The wolf was wearing a tailored suit. He worked in an air-conditioned office in the Pentagon. He drank expensive coffee, had a security clearance, and casually erased the lives of American soldiers with the stroke of a keyboard. Elena slowly unclasped the silver star from her gown. She looked at the shiny piece of metal, a symbol of honor given by an institution that was currently protecting a murderer. She tossed the medal onto the bedside table. It landed with a dull, hollow clatter. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't an empty hero meant to smile for the cameras. Staff Sergeant Elena, Ghost. Vance swung her legs over the edge of the bed and planted her bare feet firmly on the cold linoleum floor. The military thought they had sent her home to heal and fade away quietly. They were wrong. They had just brought the war to their own doorstep. The discharge papers felt heavier than her rifle ever had. Elena stood on the steaming asphalt outside Walter Reed, squinting against the harsh midday sun of a Washington, D.C. summer. She wore civilian clothes, a loose gray hoodie to hide her arm sling. worn jeans, and sneakers. She looked like just another wounded veteran transitioning back to a life she no longer understood. But inside, she was vibrating with a cold, predatory energy. The psychiatric evaluation had been a farce. The army doctor, a soft-faced colonel with tired eyes, hadn't listened to a word she said about the tampered footage. He simply nodded, scribbled in his file, and diagnosed her with severe PTSD with paranoid features. His recommendation: mandatory 90-day psychiatric leave, restricted access to military installations, and a prescription for antipsychotics that would have turned her brain to mush. They were trying to sideline her. They were trying to make her question her own sanity so the rest of the world would ignore her when she finally spoke up. Elena took a cab to her apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, a quiet suburb just across the Potomac River from the Pentagon. She sat in the backseat, her eyes tracking the side mirrors every 30 seconds. She was checking for tails, not civilian police, but the low-profile, black-windowed SUVs of the Defense Intelligence Agency or private contractors. Her neighborhood was lined with oak trees and brick garden apartments. It was peaceful, safe, the kind of place people came to forget about the rest of the world. Elena hadn't been home in 6 months. When she unlocked her front door, the air inside was stale and smelled of dust. The shades were drawn, leaving the living room in a perpetual, suffocating twilight. It was a ghost's home. No pictures of family on the walls. No personalized touches. Just books on ballistics, military history, and a half-packed duffel bag in the corner. A sniper's life fits into 2 bags. Everything else is clutter. She threw her discharge papers on the kitchen counter. They landed right next to the small, velvet-lined box containing the silver star she had packed away. She despised the metal. It was a bribe to keep her quiet. A gilded cover-up for a massive, bloody conspiracy. She walked to the master bedroom and knelt beside the bed. Reaching deep under the box spring, she pried open a hidden compartment in the floorboard. She pulled out a waterproof Pelican case. Inside was her real emergency kit. No paperwork, no medals, just utility. $10,000 in mixed, unmarked U.S. currency. 3 burner phones with encrypted SIM cards. A Canadian passport with her picture but a different name, Anya Petrova. And her personal sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 Mk25. The same pistol used by Navy SEALs. With 3 full magazines. She set the gun on the bed and began to unpack her tactical gear from her army duffel. She didn't have her M2010 sniper rifle anymore. But she had her knives, her surveillance equipment, and her sheer, unrelenting will to hunt. Clink. The sound came from the front door. Microscopic, almost silent. To anyone else, it might have been the building settling or a neighbor down the hall. But to Staff Sergeant Elena Vance, it was the specific, metallic snick of a lockpick sliding into the tumbler of her door. Her heart rate didn't spike. It entered combat rhythmic mode, 60 beats per minute. Cold and focused. They hadn't even waited 12 hours after her discharge. She grabbed the Sig Sauer, disengaged the safety, and chambered around with a smooth, silent motion. She didn't have time to put on her sling. Her left arm would have to do its best. The pain in her shoulder was intense. A white-hot reminder of Jax's sacrifice. It was an excellent motivator. She moved silently to the bedroom door, flattening herself against the wall in the dead space, the corner where the door swing wouldn't hit her. The apartment door swung open slowly. The hallway light silhouetted 2 large male figures. They weren't wearing military uniforms. They were in black tactical clothing, balaclavas covering their faces, and they carried suppressed Glock 19 pistols. Professional contractors, mercenaries. Clear, the first one whispered, his voice low and raspy. He stepped into the living room, moving towards the kitchen. The second one followed, closing the door softly behind him. "She's in the bedroom," the second man said, motioning towards Elena's position. "Remember the orders. Make it look like a suicide." PTSD overcame her. Sad tragedy. Elena felt a cold smile touch her lips. Suicide. That was how they planned to handle the inconvenience of the sole survivor. She waited until the first man was 5 feet from her doorway. Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't yell a warning. She stepped from the shadows of the bedroom. Raising the Sig Sauer. The first contractor reacted quickly, bringing his pistol up, but a sniper's reaction time is milliseconds faster than a soldier's. Thud, thud. Two suppressed shots from Alina's pistol cough loudly in the small apartment. Two shots to the chest of the lead contractor. He crumpled instantly, his muffled grunt drowned out by the thud of his body hitting the floor. The second contractor didn't retreat. He lunged forward, throwing his weight against Elena before she could reacquire her aim. The physical force slammed her back against the bedroom doorframe, agonizing pain lancing through her healing left shoulder. Her pistol clattered to the floor. The mercenary was big, heavy, and trained in Krav Maga. He didn't use his gun, he used his fists and elbows. Aiming for her face and neck, he was trying to crush her windpipe. Elena fought with the vicious, instinctual brutality of someone who had survived worse than this. She ignored the agony in her shoulder. She used her right elbow to strike his temple, then jammed her thumb deep into his eye socket. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. Elena didn't reach for her gun. She reached for the serrated combat knife she kept clipped to her belt. With one swift, smooth arc, she drove the blade upward, under the contractor's ribcage and directly into his heart. He froze. His large body went rigid. His eyes locked onto hers, bulging with shock and disbelief. Then, his strength vanished. Elena rode his body to the floor, her own breathing ragged and shallow. She sat in the dim light, surrounded by the smell of ozone, blood, and fear. She looked at the two dead men in her living room. They had intended to turn her into a tragedy, a simple headline about a broken soldier. Instead, they had confirmed every one of her fears. The conspiracy didn't stop at General Thorne. It was wealthy, powerful, and it had deep roots. They could send professional assassins to her home without fear of consequence. Elena got to her feet, wincing as she pulled the knife free. She went to the first contractor and pulled off his balaclava. His face was generic, forgettable. She checked his pockets. No wallet, no phone, but hidden inside his belt was a security fob with the initials AES. Aegis Enterprises Security, a massive, multi-billion-dollar private military contractor headquartered in Northern Virginia. AES often won lucrative Pentagon contracts. And its founder was a former defense secretary. The same company that was officially contracted to provide logistical and security analysis for her mission in Afghanistan. The same company that had confirmed the intel on the empty compound. The dots were connecting, forming a horrifying picture. AES had engineered the ambush to hide something massive: arms smuggling, data theft, war profiteering, and they were using their friends in the Pentagon to erase any witnesses. Elena Vance went to the bathroom sink. She washed the blood from her hands and face. She looked into the mirror. At the pale, bruised woman starting back at her. The staff sergeant was gone. The Silver Star recipient was dead. She grabbed a box of dye from the vanity drawer. It was jet black. She applied it to her blonde hair, watching as her identity dissolved into the chemical-smelling ooze. Then, she picked up a pair of scissors and ruthlessly cut her long hair, creating a short, severe pixie cut. She grabbed a pair of reading glasses she used for ballistics calculations and put them on. The reflection in the mirror was a stranger. An unassuming, bookish civilian, a nobody. She went back to the master bedroom, grabbed the Pelican case, and packed a small backpack with cash, the fake passport, and the Sig Sauer. She took nothing else. Not Jax's photograph of Lily, that was too important, too easily identified. She left it in the floorboard compartment, the safest place she could think of. Elena opened the window leading to the fire escape in the back of the building. The DC night was humid, the sound of crickets and distant sirens washing over her. General Thorne had sent her home to heal and disappear. The assassins had come to make it permanent. She wasn't Staff Sergeant Vance anymore. She was a woman with no name, no home, and a deadly skill set. They thought they had turned her into a tragedy. Elena stepped out onto the fire escape and merged with the shadows of the night. She didn't have her uniform or her country's protection anymore, but she finally had her mission. The hunt had officially begun. Urban camouflage is entirely different from the woods or the desert. In the Hindu Kush, a sniper blends in by mimicking the physical environment, dirt, brush, and shadow. But in Washington, D.C., you disappear by mimicking the psychology of the crowd. You become exhausted. You become hurried. You look at your phone, avoid eye contact, and become just another stressed, caffeinated ghost haunting the sidewalks. Elena sat at a corner table in a crowded, noisy coffee shop in Arlington, Virginia. The rain was coming down in sheets outside, blurring the neon signs and turning the evening commute into a sea of red taillights. She nursed a black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Her dark, cropped hair and thick-rimmed glasses perfectly masked the sharp, calculating gaze that swept the room every 15 seconds. Open on the table in front of her was her ruggedized laptop. Plugged into the USB port was a specialized card reader. And resting in the slot was the security fob she had pulled off the dead AES mercenary in her apartment. Elena was not a cyber warfare specialist. But snipers are masters of finding vulnerabilities. You don't need to blow up a tank if you can put a single armor-piercing round through the driver's viewing slit. The AES fob was her viewing slit. For 2 days, she had been parked near an AES corporate annex building, quietly using the fob's encrypted handshake to piggyback onto their guest server. From there, she bypassed the military firewalls by exploiting the shared logistical databases between AES and the Pentagon. It was a back door left open by lazy contractors. She wasn't looking for a needle in a haystack, she was looking for the windage. Who had accessed the task force Aegis drone footage exactly 3 minutes after the ambush began? Who had the clearance to slice 30 seconds of raw ISR video from the permanent DoD archive? Her screen scrolled through thousands of access logs. Lines of green text reflected in her dark glasses. Patience. That was the first rule of the hide. You let the environment tell you its secrets. Suddenly, the scrolling stopped. A single login ID had accessed the classified server at 4:25 Eastern Standard Time on the night of the ambush. It wasn't a high-ranking general or a shadowy CEO. It was a mid-level credential. User ID: L. Mendez 449. Clearance: Level 4 SIGINT. Elena ran the ID through the Federal Employee Directory. A photo popped up. Leo Mendez, 32 years old, Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, data analyst. He looked soft, with a receding hairline, nervous eyes, and a weak chin. He wasn't a mastermind, he was a keyboard jockey. A pawn. And right now, pawns were the easiest pieces to capture. Elena closed the laptop. She had a target. Tracking Leo Mendez was almost insultingly easy. Elena waited outside the sprawling DIA complex at Fort Walker. When Leo emerged at 6 p.m., he didn't walk like a man who was comfortably moving up the bureaucratic ladder. He walked like a man waiting for a firing squad. His shoulders were hunched. His eyes darted constantly to the dark SUVs idling on the street. And he flinched when a car honked its horn. He was carrying a secret that was eating him alive from the inside out. Elena shadowed him for 3 blocks, staying exactly in his blind spot. She matched his erratic pace, her hands buried in the pockets of her gray raincoat. Leo ducked into the Rosslyn metro station, practically jogging down the long, steep escalator into the subterranean depths of the DC subway system. Elena followed, blending into a group of noisy tourists. The platform was echoing and cavernous, smelling heavily of ozone, damp concrete, and friction heat. The digital sign overhead flashed. Silver Line, Weehul Reston East 3 Min. Leo walked all the way to the far end of the platform. Distancing himself from the crowd, he leaned against the tiled wall, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. Elena approached him from the shadows of a structural pillar. She didn't draw her weapon. Her presence alone was enough. You shouldn't stand so close to the edge, Leo, Elena said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yet it cut through the low rumble of the station with terrifying clarity. Someone might think you decided the guilt was too much to live with. Leo spun around, dropping his briefcase. His face went ashen. He looked at her dark hair and glasses, not recognizing her face, but instantly recognizing the cold, lethal posture of a professional. Oh, God, Leo choked out, backing up until his shoulders hit the wall. You're AES. They sent you. I told them I wouldn't say anything. I erased the files just like Sterling asked. I didn't make a copy. Sterling. Elena filed the name away instantly. AES didn't send me. Leo, Elena said, stepping closer, pinning him against the wall with nothing but her gaze. She reached into her raincoat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. She held it up in the flickering fluorescent light. It was her silver star. Leo stared at the metal, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror as the realization washed over him. He looked from the metal to her face. You're the ghost," he breathed, his legs shaking so badly he threatened to collapse. "The sniper. Vance. They said you were discharged. They said you went crazy." "Do I look crazy to you, Leo?" she asked, stepping inside his personal space. "Or do I look like a woman who watched her entire family burn in a canyon, while you sat in an air-conditioned room and erased the tape?" "I didn't want to," Leo cried, tears instantly welling in his eyes. He raised his hands defensively. "I swear to God, Vance, I didn't know what it was at first. They just told me to scrub the feed. I thought it was a classified asset extraction. By the time I realized what happened to your team, it was too late." "What did the footage show, Leo?" Elena demanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. "Why change our coordinates? Why lead us into the meat grinder?" The screech of an approaching train echoed through the tunnel, but Elena didn't break eye contact. "It wasn't a snatch and grab," Leo sobbed, completely breaking down. "The warlord, he wasn't an enemy target. He was a buyer. Task Force Aegis was walking right into the middle of a transaction." Elena frowned, her sniper's mind rapidly processing the data. "A transaction for what?" "Weapons," Leo whispered, looking around terrified. "Next-generation surface-to-air missiles. Night vision. Encrypted comms. The Pentagon loses billions of dollars in equipment every year. Right? It's not lost, Elena. AES intercepts the shipments, writes them off as destroyed in combat, and sells them on the black market to the highest bidder." The knot in Elena's stomach tightened. The breath left her lungs. "Our own weapons," she said, the horrifying truth settling over her. "They're arming the people killing us. And my team, Hap, Doc, Jax, they were going to stumble onto the exchange. They couldn't let Tier 1 operators see that," Leo said, wiping his nose, his voice trembling. "You would have reported it. It would have ruined a billion-dollar supply chain. So, the order came down. Reroute Aegis into the canyon. Let the warlord's men clean up the mess. To them, soldiers are just disposable assets. Numbers on a spreadsheet. They wrote your team off to protect the profit margin." Disposable assets. Elena thought of Jax, bleeding out in the dirt, throwing his body over a grenade so she could live. He wasn't a disposable asset. He was a father. He was a hero. And he had been murdered for money. The rage inside Elena was so absolute, so blindingly pure, that it felt like ice in her veins. She grabbed Leo by the collar of his trench coat, slamming him back against the tiles. "Who gave the order, Leo?" she hissed. "Who is Sterling?" "Arthur Sterling," Leo gasped, struggling to breathe. "He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics. He's the middleman. He approves the AES contracts. And he signs off on the lost inventory. He's the one who ordered the strike on your team." The train roared into the station, a blur of silver metal and blasting wind. The doors chimed open, flooding the platform with commuters. Elena let go of Leo's coat. She stepped back, her expression a terrifying, blank mask of lethal intent. "Where is he?" she asked. He's hosting a charity gala tomorrow night," Leo stammered, rubbing his neck. "At his private estate in Great Falls, Virginia. Half the Pentagon brass and AES board members will be there." Elena stared at the terrified analyst. She could kill him right here. He was complicit. He had erased the tape. But looking at him, she only saw a pathetic, broken coward. Killing him wouldn't bring Jax back. It wouldn't stop the machine. "You have a passport, Leo?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "Go home, pack one bag, empty your bank accounts and get on a flight to South America tonight," Elena instructed, her voice devoid of any mercy. "If I ever see your face again, or if you warn Sterling that I'm coming, I won't need a rifle to find you." Leo nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. He scrambled to pick up his briefcase and bolted onto the waiting train just as the doors began to slide shut. Elena stood alone on the platform as the train accelerated away into the dark tunnel, the red taillights fading into the blackness. She turned and walked toward the escalator. She had the windage. She had the target's elevation. Arthur Sterling thought he was untouchable behind the gates of his mansion and the power of the Pentagon. He thought he had buried his sins in the mountains of Afghanistan. But tomorrow night, the ghost was coming to the gala, and she was bringing the war with her. Great Falls, Virginia, is where Washington's true power goes to sleep at night. It is a neighborhood of sprawling, gated estates hidden behind centuries-old oak trees and winding, manicured driveways. There are no sidewalks here. If you don't belong, the private security patrols will let you know before you ever see a front door. Arthur Sterling's estate was a 15,000-square-foot monument to blood money. The sweeping front lawn was currently functioning as a valet lot for a fleet of black Mercedes, sleek Porsches, and armored SUVs. Inside the mansion, a string quartet was playing a classical rendition of a modern pop song, the notes floating over the low, wealthy hum of clinking crystal and hushed conversations. The air smelled of expensive cedar, roasted duck, and Tom Ford cologne. Elena Vance stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, her hands perfectly steady as she balanced a silver tray loaded with flutes of Dom Perignon. She wore the crisp white button-down, black silk vest, and tailored black slacks of the elite catering company hired for the evening. Her dark, freshly cropped hair was slicked back, and a pair of discreet, wire-rimmed glasses framed her eyes. She had spent 2 hours that morning forging a background check and intercepting the text messages of a legitimate waitress who suddenly came down with the flu. To the billionaires, generals, and defense contractors in the room, Elena was invisible. She was the help, a piece of the furniture. But beneath the tailored vest, strapped tightly against her ribs to avoid detection by the metal detecting wands at the service entrance, was a carbon fiber combat knife, and in her pocket was a microscopic, military-grade audio transmitter no larger than a grain of rice. Elena's eyes swept the room, dividing the ballroom into firing sectors. She wasn't looking at the silk dresses or the diamond necklaces. She was looking at the exits. She was noting the blind spots in the security cameras. And she was tracking the 4 massive men in tailored suits who stood at the perimeter of the room, AES contractors. She recognized their stance. It was the exact same posture as the men she had killed in her apartment. Then, she saw him. Arthur Sterling, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics. He was holding court by the massive marble fireplace. He was a handsome man in his late 50s, with distinguished silver hair, a deep tan, and a smile that looked like it belonged on a campaign poster. He wore a custom-fit tuxedo and held a snifter of amber liquid, laughing heartily at a joke told by a 4-star general standing next to him. When Elena looked at him, the phantom pain in her surgically repaired shoulder flared so violently it nearly took her breath away. This is the man, she thought, the roar of the Afghan wind echoing in her memory. This man signed the paper. He changed the coordinates so he could sell our weapons. He murdered Jax. Every instinct drilled into her by the United States Army screamed at her to close the distance. Draw the carbon fiber blade, and open Sterling's throat right there in front of the fireplace. It would take exactly 4 seconds. She had the windage. She had the drop on him. But a sniper's greatest weapon isn't the rifle, it's patience. A bullet to the head was too good for Arthur Sterling. It was too fast. He would die surrounded by his wealthy friends, ignorant of the terror he had caused. Elena didn't just want him dead. She wanted to dismantle him. She wanted him to feel the exact same cold, suffocating dread that her boys had felt when the valley walls lit up with enemy fire. She took a slow, measured breath, forcing her heart rate down to a steady 50 beats per minute. She stepped out of the shadows and began to weave through the crowd. "Champagne, sir?" she asked politely, offering the tray to a defense lobbyist. He took a glass without even looking at her face. She drifted closer to the fireplace. Sterling was speaking to the CEO of a major aerospace company, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial charm. "And I told the Senate committee, if we want to secure the theater, We have to accept a certain level of logistical attrition, Sterling was saying, taking a sip of his drink. It's the cost of doing business in the modern world. Logistical attrition. That was his word for dead rangers. Elena stepped up to the small cocktail table next to Sterling. She flawlessly balanced her tray on one hand. Clear your empty glasses, gentlemen, she murmured softly, keeping her chin tucked, offering a submissive posture. Oh, yes, thank you, my dear, Sterling said, casually setting his empty snifter on her tray. He was less than 2 feet away. She could see the pores on his nose. She could smell the scotch on his breath. With her free hand, Elena picked up a fresh cocktail napkin from the table. Hidden between her index and middle finger was the microscopic audio bug. In one fluid, imperceptible motion, she wiped a droplet of condensation off the marble table, pressing the sticky backing of the bug perfectly up under the heavy lip of the table, right where Sterling was resting his hand. The bug was active. It would broadcast on a secure frequency straight to her burner phone for the next 72 hours. Would you care for another scotch, Mr. Secretary? Elena asked, her voice light and entirely devoid of the murderous rage boiling inside her. Sterling finally glanced down at her. His eyes swept over her face, dismissing her instantly as unremarkable. No, thank you. I believe I'll move on to the red wine. Very good, sir, Elena said. Before she pulled her hand away, she slid a second, folded cocktail napkin onto the marble table, placing it precisely where his glass had just been. She gave a polite nod, turned on her heel, and walked away. She didn't hurry. She moved with the calm, measured stride of a ghost fading back into the mist. She glided through the heavy oak doors leading to the catering kitchen, slipped out the service exit, and disappeared into the sprawling, dark gardens of the estate. Back in the ballroom, Arthur Sterling finished his conversation with the CEO. He turned back to the cocktail table, reaching for his phone. He paused. Sitting on the polished marble was a white cocktail napkin. Someone had written on it with a thick, black marker. Sterling frowned. Picking it up, he unfolded the small square of paper. Written in neat, block letters were 2 lines of text. 34 degrees 51 and 69 degrees 23 E. Task Force Aegis says hello. Sterling stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt momentarily dizzy. The noise of the ballroom, the string quartet, the laughter, the clinking glasses, suddenly sounded like it was coming from a million miles away. He knew those coordinates. They were burned into his brain. It was the exact location of the canyon ambush in the Hindu Kush. The kill box he had authorized. His eyes darted frantically around the room, sweeping over the faces of the billionaires, the generals, and the waiters. He was looking for a threat, a weapon, a ghost, but the room was perfectly normal. No one was looking at him. A cold, icy sweat broke out on the back of his neck. The glass of red wine a waiter handed him slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering onto the hardwood floor and splashing red across his expensive shoes like fresh blood. Sir, are you all right? An AES bodyguard asked, stepping forward instantly, his hand dropping toward the concealed weapon inside his jacket. Sterling crushed the napkin in his fist, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. The secure fortress he had built around himself suddenly felt like a paper house. The military had assured him the sniper was discharged, broken, neutralized. But looking at the coordinates, Arthur Sterling realized with absolute, terrifying certainty that he was no longer the predator sitting at the top of the food chain. He was the prey. Arthur Sterling didn't panic. Men at his level didn't panic. They calculated, and then they obliterated the problem. 10 minutes after the red wine shattered onto his floor, Sterling was sitting in the secure, armored rear compartment of his black Cadillac Escalade, speeding away from his Great Falls estate. The gala was continuing behind him. A decoy. He was on an encrypted, satellite-relayed phone line, his voice a cold, venomous whip. I don't want excuses, General Thorne, Sterling hissed. The sniper is alive. She was inside my house. She gave me a white napkin with the ambush coordinates. My blood pressure is not up for discussion. Her termination is. On the other end of the line, Major General Thorne sounded exhausted. Arthur, We gave you every asset you asked for. We labeled her as having a severe mental break. We sent the AES team to handle it. You told me the problem was resolved. The problem has evolved, Sterling snarled, looking out the tinted window at the dark Virginia landscape. She's not just a soldier anymore. She's a hunter. And she knows my name. You have 15 minutes to activate a Tier 1 BOLO and authorize a shoot-to-kill order on federal property. Use the Domestic Terrorism Protocol. Level 4 priority. Thorne paused. Arthur, that requires presidential authorization if she's on DC soil. If we trigger that, the FBI, the NSA, and the DC Metro Police will all have access to the file. Our logistical operation is hidden, but it can't survive that kind of sunshine. Sterling's hand tightened around his phone until his knuckles turned white. Our operation cannot survive Elena Vance. If she talks, Thorne, we both die in a federal prison cell. Which do you prefer? A little political exposure, or the lethal injection? Make the call. Label her a terrorist. Say she stole sensitive satellite communication codes. That triggers the Patriot Act. I want the full weight of the United States government crushing her before sunrise. He slammed the phone down. Outside, the lights of the Pentagon came into view across the river, a massive concrete fortress that Sterling considered his personal property. Drive faster. He ordered the AES mercenary in the driver's seat. And get the regional SWAT commander on the line. The corrupt one from the Alexandria field office. 7 miles away, in a desolate, industrial stretch of Alexandria, Elena sat in the driver's seat of a generic, charcoal gray Ford sedan she had hotwired an hour ago. The plates were cloned from an identical car in Maryland. Invisible. She was parked behind an empty warehouse, nursing the cold coffee from the gala. Her dark glasses were off, her face illuminated by the faint glow of her laptop. The audio bug on Sterling was working perfectly. She had listened to his conversation with Thorne. Her smile was devoid of humor. Terrorist. That was the magic word in Washington, D.C. It stripped away your rights, authorized lethal force, and turned the entire world into your enemy. Sterling was terrified. He was overreacting. He was pulling the alarm bell, which meant he was vulnerable. Elena closed the laptop, a surge of adrenaline whispering through her system. The pain in her shoulder was now just a distant hum, easily ignored by the intense focus that settled over her. She knew exactly what would happen next. Thorne would make the call. The National Counter-Terrorism Center, NCTC, would generate the alert. A Level 4 priority BOLO, be on the lookout, would flash onto every terminal in the DC metro area. The FBI's Hostage Rescue Team, HRT, would mobilize. And a dozen unmarked black SUVs would begin a systematic grid search. Utilizing the NSA's real-time cell tower triangulation and traffic camera facial recognition. Let them come, she muttered, checking the magazine of her Sig Sauer P226 Mk25. She wasn't going to run. Snipers don't run, they retreat to a secondary firing position. They change the environment to suit their skills. Elena started the Ford's engine. She drove slowly out of the warehouse district, merging onto the George Washington Memorial Parkway, headed north toward the National Mall. She turned on the radio. Every news station was already running the story. Authorities are searching for a highly dangerous domestic terrorist. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance. She is a disgraced former soldier suffering a severe psychotic break. She has stolen highly sensitive national security data and is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Do not approach. Then, she heard the hum, not a police siren, but the distinct, heavy throb of a military-grade surveillance drone overhead. The NSA had localized her. Elena checked her mirrors. Far back, merging from the I-95 off-ramp, 3 blacked-out SUVs formed a tactical convoy. They weren't DC police, they were too orderly, too aggressive. FBI HRT or Sterling's AES mercenaries. It didn't matter which. First variable. Established. Elena murmured. She accelerated. The Ford's generic engine protested. But she pushed it. The black SUVs responded instantly. Lights flashing in a chaotic strobe of blue and red. No sirens. They didn't want the public interfering. Elena navigated the rainy DC streets with surgical precision. She knew the layout of Washington better than her own home. She had mapped every alley, every high-rise, and every blind spot in the surveillance grid during her downtime over 4 tours. She treating the cityscape like a battleground, calculating distance, speed, and environmental variables. She shot onto I-395 North, crossing the Potomac River onto the National Mall. The Washington Monument loomed ahead in the mist. The black SUVs were gaining. The lead vehicle attempting a pit maneuver, trying to clip the rear corner of her car and send it into a spin. Elena didn't react with panic. She waited for the exact moment of contact. She tapped her brakes, causing the mercenary driver to miss his angle. As the SUV surged alongside her, she whipped the Ford's steering wheel hard to the right. The generic sedan slammed its mass against the heavy armored SUV. The kinetic force was sufficient to cause the SUV's tire to catch a rain slick, sending it into a violent, spinning slide across 4 lanes of traffic. It clipped a concrete median, flipping once before landing with a crushing thud. One variable neutralized. But there were 5 more, and the drone overhead was tracking her every move, guiding the others in. She needed to lose the electronic eye. Patience, Ghost, she whispered to herself. She drove toward the massive, arched concrete mouth of the I-395 tunnel that runs beneath the mall in Capitol Hill. The tunnel offered a few thousand feet of electronic dead space, no GPS, no satellite, no cell signals. As she shot into the tunnel, the screaming tires of the remaining SUVs echoed against the tiles. The roar of engines was deafening. Elena was in their kill zone now. The lane was narrow, the walls unforgiving. She checked her rearview mirror. 2 AES SUVs were right on her tail. She could see the muzzle of a suppressed rifle aiming from the passenger window of the lead vehicle. Sterling hadn't just authorized a shoot-to-kill order, he was paying top dollar for it. Clink. A high-velocity bullet shattered her rear window, the glass dissolving into a million safety fragments. Elena ducked, keeping her foot pressed firmly on the accelerator. The exit of the tunnel was approaching, a blinding light at the end of the darkness. Elena didn't accelerate toward it. She slammed on the brakes. The sudden deceleration caught the lead mercenary SUV by surprise. It rammed violently into the rear of her Ford. The impact was crushing. Her airbags didn't deploy, she had disconnected them, but her chest slammed against the seatbelt, knocking the wind out of her. The Ford's rear bumper was fused to the SUV's grille. Elena shoved the car into reverse. The Ford's tires screeched, pulling the combined weight of both vehicles backward into the other lanes, creating a chaotic, multi-car pileup inside the tunnel. The other mercenary SUV had to swerve violently to avoid the collision, slamming into the tiled wall, its engine bursting into flames. The tunnel was now a wreckage of screaming civilians, smoke, and crushed metal. Elena, despite the pain in her ribs, didn't hesitate. She grabbed her backpack, kicked open the jammed driver's door, and stepped out into the smoke. She was invisible in the chaos. She did not walk toward the exit. She knew the NSA would be waiting for her to emerge. Instead, she jogged back toward the heart of the darkness. In the center of the tunnel, hidden behind a concrete pillar, was a small, heavy steel door marked Utility Emergency Access. She had mapped this. This door led to the subterranean maintenance network of the DC metro system. A sprawling, echoing world of pipes, steam, and abandoned tunnels that dated back 100 years. She pulled out her lockpick set, her fingers moving with a surgeon's speed. The tumblers clicked. She slipped through the door and closed it silently behind her, vanishing into the subterranean bowels of the capital city. Up on the surface, 30 seconds later, the NSA drone feed showed only a massive, fiery collision inside the I-395 tunnel. Major General Thorne, watching from a secure Pentagon operations center, stared at the screen. "Did we get her?" he demanded. "The thermal signatures inside the tunnel are too intense to confirm, General," the NCTC tech replied. "The vehicles are burning. The signal loss was complete. But if she was in that car..." Thorne closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to believe the sniper was dead. But the rest of him, the part that knew Staff Sergeant Elena, Ghost, Vance, knew better. Down in the moisture-slicked darkness of the maintenance tunnels, Elena clicked on her tactical flashlight. The air was thick and smelled of ozone and rust. She walked with a calm, Deliberate pace. Listening to the drip of water. General Thorne had used the full weight of the government to crush her. He had called her a ghost. He had labeled her a tragedy. Elena adjusted her backpack, a cold, unbreakable resolve settling in her heart. They thought they had buried her in a tunnel. They were wrong. They hadn't trapped her. She had simply changed the hide. General Thorne had built a fortress. Arthur Sterling had built a multi-billion-dollar lie. But tomorrow night, the ghost was going to rise from the grave, and she was going to burn their paper fortress to the ground. The subterranean tunnels of the DC metro system smelled of ancient rust, damp earth, and voltage. Elena sat on a heavy, cast-iron steam pipe, the darkness pressing in around her like a physical weight. Her ribs ached fiercely from the car crash, and her surgically repaired shoulder throbbed with a dull, rhythmic agony. But physical pain was a familiar companion. She ignored it, pulling the encrypted burner phone from her jacket pocket. The microscopic audio bug she had planted under the marble table at the gala was still transmitting. She plugged in a single earpiece, the green light of the phone screen casting a ghostly pallor over her bruised face. She hit play on the most recent recording. It was Arthur Sterling. He wasn't speaking with the smooth, arrogant drawl of a Washington power player anymore. He was breathing heavily, his voice shrill with panic. The NCTC lost her in the tunnels. The drones have nothing, Sterling was shouting, pacing back and forth in what sounded like a secure office. She's a ghost. Bill, she put the exact coordinates on a napkin in my own house. If she goes to the press, get a grip on yourself. Arthur. The second voice on the line stopped Elena's heart. It was a deep, gravelly baritone, instantly recognizable to anyone who watched Sunday morning political talk shows. It was United States Senator William Cross, the powerful chairman of the Armed Services Committee. You are a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Senator Cross continued, his voice dripping with icy contempt. Stop whining like a frightened child. General Thorne has initiated a Level 4 BOLO. Every federal agent on the eastern seaboard is looking for a disgraced, mentally unstable soldier. If she goes to the press, she looks like a lunatic. She knows about the weapons. Bill, she knows about AES. She knows nothing she can prove. Cross snapped. But your panic is becoming a liability. The final shipment of the surface-to-air missiles is leaving Andrews Air Force Base tomorrow night at 2 o'clock hours. The buyers are flying in on a diplomatic transport. This transaction secures our shadow funding for the next decade. You will be there to sign off on the cargo transfer. Arthur, if you cannot contain a single broken sniper before then, I will contain you, and I assure you, my methods are far less bureaucratic than General Thorne's. The line went dead. Elena pulled the earpiece out, letting it dangle against her chest. She stared into the pitch-black tunnel. Arthur Sterling wasn't the mastermind. He was just the logistics guy, the middleman moving the pieces on the board. Senator William Cross was the architect, a man who sat on Capitol Hill, making impassioned speeches about supporting the troops, while secretly selling the very weapons that were killing them to fund his own private Black Ops slush fund. A heavy, terrifying silence settled over Elena. She was one woman with a pistol and a stolen laptop, going up against the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a corrupt Pentagon general, and a billionaire defense contractor. She opened her laptop, using the AES security fob. She accessed the back door of Sterling's private network one last time. While Sterling had been panicking, he had logged into his personal, encrypted offshore accounts to check his escape funds. He had left the digital door wide open. Elena didn't destroy the accounts. She drained them. With a few keystrokes, she routed exactly $4.5 million in untraceable, decentralized cryptocurrency from Sterling's Cayman Island shell company into a blind, irrevocable trust in Switzerland. It was blood money, and she knew exactly where it belonged. 14 hours later. Columbus, Ohio. The rain in the Midwest didn't scrape like the wind in the Hindu Kush. It fell in heavy, rhythmic sheets, washing the suburban streets in a melancholy, gray light. Elena parked the stolen, nondescript Honda Civic 2 blocks away. She walked through the rain, her collar turned up, a heavy manila envelope tucked securely inside her jacket to keep it dry. She stopped across the street from a neat, two-story house with white siding and a wraparound porch. There was a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree in the front yard. It was perfectly ordinary. It was the American dream. It was Jax's house. Elena crossed the wet grass silently, moving like a shadow until she was standing by the living room window. The curtains were drawn back just enough for her to see inside. The living room was warm, lit by a soft lamp. On the fireplace mantel sat a folded American flag in a triangular cherry wood case. Beneath it was a framed photograph of Corporal Jax Miller in his dress blues. Smiling that easy, goofy smile. Sitting in a rocking chair near the fireplace was Sarah. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she wore one of Jax's oversized flannel shirts. Resting against her chest, fast asleep, was baby Lily. Elena pressed her hand against the cold, wet glass of the window. The crushing weight of what had been stolen from this family hit her all at once. The steel wall she had built around her heart over the last month finally cracked. A single tear escaped her eye, mixing with the rain on her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Jax," she thought, the grief threatening to pull her under. "I couldn't bring you home for the steak dinner." She forced herself to step away from the window. She couldn't break down. Not yet. She walked onto the porch, her footsteps completely silent on the wooden boards. She pulled the thick manila envelope from her jacket and placed it carefully on the welcome mat. Inside were the legal documents for the Swiss trust containing the $4.5 million. Set up securely in Lily's name so the government could never touch it. It would pay for the house, for college, for a life free of financial worry. But more importantly, resting on top of the documents, was the laminated photograph of Lily that Jax had taped to his wrist monitor. The edges were slightly stained with his blood. It was the only proof Sarah would ever have that her husband had fought for his family until his very last breath. Elena turned to leave. Creak. The sound of the front door opening froze her in her tracks. She stepped instantly off the porch, melting into the deep shadows cast by the old oak tree. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding Lily with one arm, pulling a sweater around her shoulders against the damp chill. She looked down and saw the thick envelope on the welcome mat. Frowning, Sarah bent down and picked it up. She opened the flap. Elena watched from the darkness as Sarah pulled out the laminated photograph. Sarah gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She knew exactly what that photo was. Jax had told her about it on their last phone call. Sarah looked up, her tear-filled eyes scanning the rainy, dark street. She couldn't see Elena's face. She only saw the silhouette of a woman standing in the shadows of the oak tree. Rain pouring off her jacket. For a long, suspended moment, the two women looked at each other through the rain. Neither spoke. No words could bridge the gap between the world of the living and the world of the ghosts. But Sarah understood. She clutched the photograph to her chest, right over her heart, and gave a slow, barely perceptible nod of profound gratitude. From the shadows, Elena stood at rigid attention. She brought her right hand up to her brow in a slow, silent, perfectly executed military salute, a final goodbye to her brother, a final promise to his family. Elena lowered her hand, turned, and walked away into the rain. She had paid her debts to the dead. Now, it was time to collect from the living. She got back into the Honda and turned the ignition. She put the car in drive and headed east, back toward the sprawling, corrupt heart of Washington, D.C. Senator Cross and Arthur Sterling were going to Andrews Air Force Base tomorrow night to sell American weapons to the highest bidder. They were expecting diplomats. They were expecting a clean transaction. They weren't expecting a ghost. The Pentagon is not merely a building, it is a sprawling, five-sided concrete city. It possesses 17 miles of corridors, houses 24,000 employees, and manages a budget larger than the GDP of most nations. It is guarded by the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, monitored by thousands of high-definition cameras, and fortified against everything from cyber attacks to direct missile strikes. You cannot storm the Pentagon. You cannot fight your way inside. But if you are a ghost, you don't need to break down the door. You just need to find the cracks in the armor. It was 1:15 a.m. The relentless DC rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, Suffocating fog rolling off the Potomac River. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance stood in knee-deep, freezing water inside a subterranean drainage culvert a quarter-mile from the Pentagon's south parking lot. She wore the black tactical gear she had stripped from the AES mercenary in her apartment. Her face painted with dark camouflage grease. Her broken ribs screamed with every breath, and her left shoulder was a dull, burning knot of agony. She pushed the pain down into a dark, locked box in her mind. Focus, she told herself. Front sight, trigger squeeze. General Thorne had the entire city looking for her on the streets. But Elena knew the military's blind spots. The Pentagon was built in the 1940s. Beneath the state-of-the-art biometric scanners and blast-proof glass lay an antiquated labyrinth of steam pipes, utility tunnels, and HVAC exhaust shafts. Using the architectural blueprints she had memorized during her tours in D.C., Elena waded through the drainage pipe until she reached a heavy iron grate. It was an intake vent for the sub-basement cooling system. It was alarmed, but the alarm ran on a localized circuit. She pulled a pair of insulated wire clippers from her tactical vest. With surgical precision, she bridged the magnetic contact switch, feeding the circuit its own continuous loop. The system still thought the grate was closed. She smoothly unbolted the iron frame and slid into the suffocating darkness of the ventilation shaft. This was the sniper's world. The crawl. For 45 agonizing minutes, Elena moved through the ductwork. She used her elbows and toes, dragging her body forward an inch at a time. The sheet metal amplified every sound, so she timed her movements with the rhythmic, heavy thrum of the massive industrial cooling fans. Thrum. She pulled herself forward. Thrum. She dragged her boots up. She bypassed the outer E-ring, moving deeper into the concentric circles of the fortress. Her target was the DoD intranet hub in the C-ring. Arthur Sterling and Senator Cross had scrubbed the satellite footage of the ambush from the official record. But in the military, data is never truly deleted. It is quarantined in a deep archive server that requires hardwired physical access from inside the Pentagon's firewall. Elena needed that missing 30 seconds. Without it, the audio recording of Sterling panicking was just hearsay. With the video, it was an undeniable war crime. Elena reached a vent register overlooking a dimly lit corridor. Through the slats, she saw the sterile, highly polished linoleum of the C-ring. She checked her watch. 1:55 a.m. According to the guard rotations she had studied, a two-man PFPA patrol would pass this intersection in exactly 2 minutes. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate to a rhythmic, meditative 45 beats per minute. She became a piece of the architecture. Footsteps echoed down the hall. 2 armed guards walked past, complaining softly about the coffee in the basement cafeteria. They didn't look up. People rarely look up. The moment they rounded the corner, Elena removed the vent cover and dropped silently to the floor. She landed in a crouch, absorbing the impact with her knees, making no more noise than a falling leaf. She slipped down the hall, melting from shadow to shadow, until she reached the heavy steel door of the intranet hub. The biometric scanner glowed an angry red. Elena didn't try to hack the scanner. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the encrypted AES security fob she had taken from the dead mercenary. Wiring it directly into a small, modified USB interface on her stolen laptop, she plugged the interface into the diagnostic port beneath the keypad. AES maintained the Pentagon's security databases. It was the ultimate conflict of interest, and Elena used it against them. The fob spoofed an emergency maintenance override. The light on the scanner flashed from red to green. Click. Elena slipped inside the server room. It was freezing cold, filled with rows of towering black mainframes blinking with thousands of tiny blue and green LED lights. The low hum of the servers sounded like a beehive. She moved to the central terminal, opened her laptop, and initiated the bridge. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She bypassed the standard directories, diving straight into the quarantined archives. Search parameters. Task Force Aegis. Date. 14th. ISR drone feed. Raw data. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Decrypting. Suddenly, the heavy steel door of the server room clanged, the locking mechanism engaging from the outside. Elena froze. her hand dropping instantly to the hilt of the carbon fiber knife strapped to her chest. Someone was coming. She unplugged her laptop, grabbed her interface cable, and scrambled up the side of the server racks, wedging herself securely into the dark gap between the top of the mainframes and the ceiling tiles. The door swung open. A single technician walked in, carrying a clipboard. He looked bored, clearly running a routine midnight diagnostic check. Elena lay perfectly still on top of the server rack, less than 4 feet above the technician's head. A single bead of sweat formed on her brow, stinging her eye. If it fell and hit the metal floor, it would echo like a gunshot. She slowly, painstakingly raised the sleeve of her black shirt and caught the drop of sweat before it could fall. The technician checked a few gauges, tapped a screen, and let out a long yawn. He turned and walked out, the heavy door locking securely behind him. Elena let out a slow, measured exhale. She dropped back down to the floor, instantly reconnecting her laptop. The decryption finished. The file opened. Elena pressed play. The missing 30 seconds of the drone footage filled her screen. She saw the canyon in the Hindu Kush. She saw the shadow of the boulder. But this time, it didn't jump. She watched as a convoy of unlit, armored trucks rolled into the valley. She watched as the warlord's men unloaded heavy wooden crates stamped with United States military insignias. And she watched as a single flare shot up into the sky, the signal that the transaction was complete. And the signal for the ambush on her team to begin. It was pure, undeniable treason, captured in high-definition thermal imaging. Elena compiled the video file, attached the audio recording of Sterling and Cross, and added the banking ledgers she had stolen from Sterling's offshore accounts. She set the destination servers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, WikiLeaks, and the private inbox of the FBI director. She didn't hit send, not yet. She set a dead man switch on her laptop. The file would automatically upload and broadcast to the world in exactly 45 minutes. Bypassing the Pentagon's firewalls from the inside out. There was no way to stop it now. The truth was out of her hands and in the machine. Her mission here was done. She had exposed the conspiracy. But as she closed the laptop and tucked it into her pack, Elena felt the cold, hard weight of her Sig Sauer pistol pressing against her hip. Exposing the truth was for the world. But Arthur Sterling was for Jax. Sterling was in the building. He was upstairs in the E-ring, sitting in his plush office, signing the final authorizations to transfer the weapons to Andrews Air Force Base. Elena slipped back out of the server room and moved toward the stairwell. She wasn't crawling back through the vents. The ghost was done hiding. It was time to introduce the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense to the logistical attrition of a Tier 1 sniper. The E-ring of the Pentagon is the outermost corridor of the building. It is where the most powerful military leaders in the world sit behind blast-proof mahogany doors. Their offices boasting sweeping views of the Potomac River and the Washington Monument. At 2:30 in the morning, Arthur Sterling's private office was a fortress of quiet luxury. The air smelled of expensive leather, lemon furniture polish, and the faint, peaty aroma of an open bottle of 20-year-old Macallan Scotch. Sterling stood by his reinforced window, looking out at the foggy DC skyline. He wore a crisp white shirt, his tie loosened, a crystal glass clutched tightly in his hand. On his massive oak desk sat a secured titanium briefcase. Inside were the final transfer authorizations for the stolen surface-to-air missiles heading to Andrews Air Force Base. He took a long swallow of the scotch, trying to calm the tremor in his fingers. Senator Cross was right. He had panicked. The NCTC had lost the sniper in the tunnels. She was likely crushed in the wreckage or bleeding out in a storm drain. It was over. The money was secure. The transaction was on schedule. And tomorrow, he would be. You should really lock your door, Arthur. The voice came from the shadows behind his desk. It was barely more than a whisper, rough as sandpaper and cold as a grave. Sterling froze. The blood turned to ice in his veins. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the thick Persian rug with a dull thud, the amber liquid staining the wool. He turned around slowly. Sitting in his high-backed leather desk chair was Staff Sergeant Elena Vance. She was covered in dirt, grease, and the unmistakable smell of subterranean exhaust. Her face was a bruised, battered canvas of exhaustion, but her eyes, those terrifying, predatory eyes, were locked onto him with absolute, unwavering focus. In her right hand, resting casually on his immaculate desk, was a suppressed Sig Sauer P226 pistol. The muzzle was pointed directly at his chest. "How?" Sterling choked out, taking a heavy step backward until his shoulders hit the blast-proof window. "PFPA security. The biometric scanners." "You built a digital wall, Arthur," Elena said softly, not moving a muscle. "But you forgot to look in the vents. People who sit in glass towers rarely look down." Sterling's eyes darted toward the panic button hidden beneath the lip of his desk. It was only 6 feet away. "Take the step," Elena offered, her voice devoid of any emotion. "See if you can beat the bullet." Sterling swallowed hard, raising his hands slowly in a gesture of surrender. The polished, arrogant politician was gone. The man standing against the glass was a cornered animal. "Listen to me, Vance," Sterling said, his voice trembling. He tried to inject his usual command into his tone, but it cracked. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. This isn't just about money. You think I wanted to sacrifice your team? I didn't, but you don't know how the world works." Elena cocked the hammer of the pistol. The metallic click echoed like a cannon shot in the quiet room. "Tell me how the world works, Arthur," she whispered. "It's about global stability," Sterling pleaded, gesturing frantically. "The Pentagon budget is being slashed every year. The Chinese are expanding. The Russians are pushing the borders. We needed off-the-books funding to run black operations that keep this country safe. Senator Cross and I, we created a logistical pipeline. We sell older tech to regional warlords so we can afford next-generation security for the homeland. It's the greater good." "The greater good," Elena repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "You changed our coordinates. You led Task Force Aegis into a canyon where heavily armed hostiles were waiting. Just so you could hide your delivery. 6 men died in the dirt." "They were soldiers," Sterling shouted, desperation making him reckless. "They signed up to die for their country. That's what you do. You are the logistical attrition required to maintain the economy of global security. What difference does it make if they die stepping on an IED or taking a bullet to protect a trillion-dollar supply chain? It's the cost of doing business." Silence descended on the room. Heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Elena stood up from the chair. She didn't walk, she stalked toward him. A phantom rising from the grave. The phantom pain in her shoulder flared. But it was nothing compared to the white-hot inferno of rage burning in her chest. She thought of Hap. She thought of Doc. She thought of Jax, bleeding out in the freezing mountain wind, staring at a picture of a daughter he would never hold. Logistical attrition. She closed the distance in 3 strides. She pressed the cold steel suppressor of the pistol directly against Sterling's forehead. Sterling let out a pathetic, whimpering gasp. He closed his eyes, tears squeezing out, his knees buckling slightly. "Please," he sobbed. "I can give you money. I can give you anything. Just don't kill me." Elena's finger tightened on the trigger. 5 pounds of pressure was all it took. One twitch of her index finger, and the man who murdered her family would cease to exist. It would be so easy. It would be so deeply, violently satisfying. The sniper's math was perfect. The target was acquired. But as she looked at the weeping, pathetic billionaire cowering against the glass, a voice echoed in the back of her mind. Live. It was Jax's voice. In that split second before the grenade detonated, he hadn't asked her for vengeance. He hadn't asked her for blood. He had asked her to survive. To be the person who came home to eat a steak dinner and hold his daughter. If she pulled the trigger, she wasn't a soldier anymore. She was exactly what Sterling thought she was, an assassin. A disposable asset. A murderer. Killing Arthur Sterling would just make him a martyr for the intelligence community. They would cover it up, sweep his crimes under the rug, and the machine would keep churning. Elena's fingers slowly relaxed. She exhaled a long, shuddering breath. "You're right, Arthur," Elena whispered, stepping back and lowering the pistol. "Soldiers sign up to die for their country. But we don't sign up to die for your stock portfolio." Sterling opened his eyes, panting heavily, a confused, desperate glimmer of hope flashing across his face. You're not going to kill me? No, Elena said. She reached into her pocket with her left hand and pulled out her encrypted burner phone. I'm going to do something much worse. She tossed the phone onto his massive oak desk. It skittered across the polished wood and came to a stop next to the titanium briefcase. Look at the screen, she ordered. Sterling, shaking uncontrollably, leaned over the desk. The phone screen was glowing. It displayed a terminal command window with a green progress bar that read, "Upload 100% complete." What is this? Sterling breathed. 15 minutes ago, I was in the C-Ring intranet archive, Elena said, her voice finally calm, the storm inside her breaking into cold, bright clarity. I found the missing 30 seconds of the drone footage. I also recorded our little chat at the gala. And your panicked phone call with Senator Cross tonight. I bundled it all up with the routing numbers from your Cayman Island accounts. Sterling's face went the color of dead ash. No. Yes, Elena said. That upload just bypassed the DoD firewalls. It was sent simultaneously to the New York Times, the Washington Post, WikiLeaks, and the private inbox of the director of the FBI. The world knows exactly what you did, Arthur. They know about the weapons. They know about Cross. And they know about Task Force Aegis. You destroyed everything. Sterling screamed, lunging toward the phone as if he could somehow pull the data back from the ether. I didn't destroy anything, Elena replied, backing toward the heavy mahogany door. I just turned on the lights. Suddenly, the blaring, mechanized wail of the Pentagon's general alarm system shattered the silence of the night. Red strobe lights began to pulse in the corridor outside the office. The Cybersecurity Division had finally detected the massive outbound data leak. The military police are already on their way up here, Arthur, Elena said, opening the door. The chaotic shouts of security personnel echoed up the stairwell. They're going to arrest you for treason. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a supermax cell in Florence, Colorado. And Senator Cross is going down with you. Sterling stood completely paralyzed, his empire crumbling into dust before his eyes. Elena stepped out into the hallway. She looked back at the ruined man one last time. The ghost says goodbye, Mr. Secretary, she said. She pulled the heavy mahogany door shut, the latch clicking with a final, definitive thud. Elena turned and disappeared into the pulsing red lights of the Pentagon corridor, melting back into the shadows exactly as she had come. The Pentagon did not wake up slowly, it erupted. The blaring, synthesized klaxon of the Level 1 security breach alarm cut through the 17 miles of corridors like a physical blade. Crimson strobe lights flashed in rhythm with the siren, painting the sterile white walls of the E-ring in harsh, bloody pulses. Inside the subterranean bunkers of the United States Cyber Command, technicians were frantically typing lines of code, trying to build a digital dam to stop the hemorrhage of classified data. But they were chasing a ghost. Elena's upload had been hardwired directly into the deepest archive, utilizing Arthur Sterling's own encrypted backdoor. The dam hadn't just broken, it had been vaporized. Outside Arthur Sterling's office, a four-man tactical team from the Pentagon Force Protection Agency stacked up against the heavy mahogany door. The lead officer, gripping a customized M4 carbine, held up 3 fingers. 2, 1. He kicked the door. The reinforced locking mechanism, already disengaged by Elena, gave way instantly. Federal agents, show me your hands, show me your hands, the officers screamed, their weapon lights sweeping the plush, luxurious office. They didn't find a terrorist. They didn't find a heavily armed sniper. They found the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense sitting on the floor behind his massive oak desk, his back pressed against the blast-proof glass. Arthur Sterling was staring blankly at the encrypted burner phone resting near his immaculate shoes. His custom-tailored suit was rumpled, and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. Mr. Secretary, are you injured? Where is the hostel? The lead officer demanded, keeping his rifle raised as the team cleared the corners of the room. Sterling didn't look at the officer. He just slowly shook his head, a hollow, broken laugh escaping his lips. She's everywhere, he whispered. The officer's radio crackled to life. Command to Team Alpha, stand down on the active shooter protocol. Repeat, stand down. The director of the FBI has just issued an emergency federal warrant for the occupant of that office. Secure him immediately. The lead officer lowered his rifle. Exchanging a confused glance with his squadmate, he stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy flex cuffs from his tactical vest. Arthur Sterling, the officer said, his voice stripping away the man's title and power in a single breath. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. Sterling didn't fight. The man who had casually written off the lives of American soldiers as logistical attrition allowed himself to be hauled to his feet and cuffed like a common street criminal. His empire reduced to a pair of tight plastic zip ties. 2:45 a.m. Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland. 15 miles away, the cold, wet tarmac of the airfield was illuminated by the harsh yellow floodlights of the loading zone. A massive C-17 Globemaster transport plane sat with its rear cargo ramp lowered, its 4 engines whining in a low, continuous idle. Senator William Cross stood near the base of the ramp, flanked by a half-dozen AES private security contractors. He pulled up the collar of his cashmere overcoat against the biting wind, checking his gold Rolex for the 4th time. "Where the hell is Sterling?" Cross barked, his deep, authoritative voice easily carrying over the engine noise. "The diplomatic transport is going to be in American airspace in 20 minutes. If he doesn't bring the DoD transfer authorizations, this entire deal is dead in the water." The lead AES contractor pressed a hand to his earpiece, a frown deepening on his scarred face. "Sir, I can't reach Mr. Sterling. And we've just lost encrypted comms with the Pentagon's logistical hub." Senator Cross's eyes narrowed. A cold prickle of unease washed over him. He was a survivor of Washington politics. He knew what the sudden silence meant. "Button up the cargo," Cross ordered instantly, turning toward his armored limousine. "We're scrubbing the drop. Get me back to Capitol Hill right." The roar of high-performance engines cut him off. From the dark edges of the tarmac, 6 black, unlit Suburbans tore onto the runway, moving with terrifying, synchronized speed. They didn't have flashing police lights. They didn't need them. They boxed in the C-17 and the senator's limousine in a flawless tactical maneuver, cutting off every avenue of escape. The doors of the Suburbans flew open, and 36 agents poured out. They wore heavy Kevlar vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters, FBI, HRT. The hostage rescue team, the most elite tactical law enforcement unit in the country. "Drop your weapons. Do it now," the agents roared, their laser sights painting the chests of the AES contractors. The private mercenaries, realizing they were outgunned and outmaneuvered by federal authorities, slowly lowered their rifles and raised their hands. They were paid to protect a shipment, not to start a war with the FBI. Senator Cross stood frozen by the door of his limousine as the agents secured the perimeter. A tall man in a dark trench coat walked through the chaotic scene. It was the assistant director of the FBI. Cross drew himself up to his full height, summoning every ounce of his political intimidation. "What is the meaning of this?" he thundered, pointing a finger at the advancing director. "I am the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. You are interfering with a classified national security operation. I will have your badge for this. You understand me? I will have you testifying in front of Congress by noon." The assistant director didn't flinch. He walked right up to the powerful senator and pulled a smartphone from his pocket. He tapped the screen. "The final shipment of the surface-to-air missiles is leaving Andrews Air Force Base tomorrow night at 2:00 hours. The buyers are flying in on a diplomatic transport. This transaction secures our shadow funding for the next decade." It was Cross's own voice, crystal clear, playing from the phone's speaker. The recording Elena had captured just an hour ago. The blood drained from the senator's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The blustering, untouchable titan of Capitol Hill suddenly looked like a very old, very tired man. Every major news desk in the world got that audio filed 10 minutes ago. "Senator," the assistant director said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. "Along with the thermal video of the Task Force Aegis ambush, and the offshore routing numbers, you don't have a committee anymore. You don't have a career. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." Senator William Cross, the architect of the slaughter in the Hindu Kush, turned and placed his hands on the cold metal of the limousine. 3:10 a.m. The Pentagon, South parking lot. While the world's most powerful military building was tearing itself apart from the inside, the evacuation protocols had forced thousands of night shift personnel out into the sprawling parking lots. It was a sea of confusion, blaring sirens, and flashing red lights. Nobody noticed the slight, dark-haired woman in the oversized, gray janitorial jumpsuit slipping through the crowd. Elena Vance kept her head down, her hands buried deep in the pockets of the jumpsuit she had pulled from a utility closet in the basement. The heavy tactical gear and the encrypted laptop were gone, left behind in the subterranean tunnels. She had scrubbed the camouflage grease from her face and threw her wire-rimmed glasses into a storm drain. She walked past a line of military police cruisers, their radios squawking with panicked updates about Senator Cross's arrest and the viral data leak. It's everywhere. CNN just broke the story on live television. They're calling it the Aegis leak. Elena didn't stop to listen. She just kept walking. Her ribs ached. Her surgically repaired shoulder was a burning mass of fire. She was exhausted down to the very marrow of her bones. But as she reached the edge of the Pentagon perimeter and stepped onto the damp, quiet pavement of the pedestrian pathway leading toward the Potomac River, she took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain, river water, and freedom. For the first time since she had woken up in that blood-soaked ravine in the Hindu Kush. The crushing, suffocating weight on her chest was gone. The ghost had done what the staff sergeant could not. She had torn down the fortress, exposed the wolves, and secured the future of a little girl in Ohio. She walked into the misty Washington, D.C. night, the frantic sirens fading into the distance behind her. She didn't look back. There was nothing left for her in that building. There was only the open road ahead, and the quiet, peaceful silence of a mission finally complete. Arlington National Cemetery is the quietest place in Washington, D.C. Across the Potomac River, the city was waking up to a political earthquake. News anchors were frantically breaking the story of the Aegis leak, and federal agents were turning the Pentagon inside out. But here, on the rolling green hills of Virginia, the chaos of the world simply faded away. Here, there was only the geometric perfection of white marble headstones standing at attention in the early morning mist. The air was crisp, smelling of wet grass, turned earth, and the faint, sweet scent of dogwood blossoms. Elena Vance walked slowly down the paved path of Section 60, the final resting place for the men and women who had fallen in the nation's most recent conflicts. She wasn't wearing tactical gear or a blood-stained uniform. She wore a simple, dark wool coat against the morning chill. Her hair was growing out, and the bruises on her face were fading into a dull yellow. The limp in her step was barely noticeable now. She stopped at a freshly seeded patch of earth overlooking a gentle slope. There were 5 graves in a perfect, unbroken row. Captain Hap Hayes. Specialist, Doc Gonzalez. Staff Sergeant Mark Davies. Private First Class Thomas Chen. Corporal Jax Miller. Elena stood at the foot of the graves, her hands deep in her coat pockets. She didn't cry. The tears had all been spent in the rain outside a house in Ohio. Today, there was only a profound, heavy peace. "Hey, boys," Elena whispered, her voice carrying softly on the morning breeze. "I brought you home." She walked slowly down the line, touching the top of each cold marble stone, lingering on the names of her brothers. When she finally reached the end of the row, she knelt on the damp grass in front of Jax's grave. She traced the engraved letters of his name with her fingertips. "I saw Sarah," Elena said quietly, looking at the stone as if she were sitting across a table from him. "She's strong, Jax, stronger than both of us. Lily has your eyes, and they're going to be okay. They never have to worry about anything ever again. I made sure of it." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. Elena opened it, the morning light catching the dull shine of the silver star resting on the dark fabric. The military had given it to her for surviving, for crawling out of a canyon while the rest of her team bled into the dirt. But she knew the truth. "They gave this to the wrong person," Elena whispered. She took the medal from the box and placed it gently on top of Jax's headstone, resting it right above his name. "You told me to live. she said, her throat tightening just a fraction. And I will. I promise you. Brother, I'm going to find a quiet place. I'm going to watch the sunrise without looking through a scope. I'm going to live for both of us. She placed her hand flat against the marble one last time, feeling the solid, grounding reality of it. Rest easy, Aegis, she murmured. Your watch is done. Elena stood up, brushing the damp grass from her knees. Somewhere in the distance, over the crest of the hill, a ceremonial detail was conducting a mourning funeral. The sharp crack of a 3-volley rifle salute echoed across the cemetery. And then, a lone bugler began to play taps. The 24 mournful, haunting notes drifted through the mist, wrapping around the white stones like a heavy, protective blanket. Elena turned her collar up against the breeze. She looked back at the city skyline one last time, the monuments, the bridges, the halls of power that she had shaken to their very foundations. Then, she turned her back to it all. Staff Sergeant Elena, Ghost, Vance walked down the paved path. Her footsteps completely silent, as the final, lingering note of the trumpet faded into the crisp Virginia air. She disappeared into the morning mist. She was still a ghost. But finally, she was at peace.